Welcome back to the series. We're up to about 230 professors, scholars, experts, and activists who have written or have been intimately involved with the concept of political polarization. Today, it is my true privilege to have with us Rachel BITECOFER. She is the author of Hit 'em Where It Hurts, How to Save Democracy by Beating Republicans at Their Own Game. I just bought myself a copy, finished reading it. We're going to go into details there, but let me introduce you to the speaker. Here's a little bit about some of the information that we found. You can find her on Salon. She has a Substack. Also, there's a C-SPAN video, YouTube, blog for Arizona. She was also on MSNBC and wrote 2 academic papers. We'll get to that. Here's Rachel. Here's the book. Let me shrink that down so you can see the whole thing. That's the book. Dr. Rachel BITECOFER, I apologize, is a political scientist and election forecaster turned political strategist. BITECOFER's interviews and analysts have been featured by the New York Times, Washington Post, Salon, Politico, The New Republic, Real Time with Bill Mayer. I missed that one. CNN, MSNBC, and many other prominent news sources. She's worked with the Democratic Party candidates and organizations to implement negative partisanship strategy in the 2022 midterms. Why do Democrats fail to win voters to their side? And what can they do to develop a new winning political strategies, especially as the very fate of democracy hangs in the balance in 2024? Too often, the carefully constructed rational arguments by the left meet a grisly fate at the polls, where voters are instead swayed by Republican candidates hawking anger, fear, and resentment. Only when Democrats are handed an overwhelming motivational issue like the Supreme Court 2022 Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade have they found a way to counteract. Political scientist and strategist Rachel BITECOFER came to prominence after predicting the size to the seat of the Democrats' rare blue wave in the 2018 midterms. The heart of her prediction laid the powerful concept of negative partisanship, or the idea that voters, even most so-called independents, don't vote for the candidate so much as they vote against the other opponent's candidate. We'll get more into it, but did I say something wrong so far as your background or about the introduction of the book before we go do a deep dive on the book? I tried to find a curriculum vitae for you, and I was unable to, and I apologize.
I guess they purged me out of my old system. I mean, I was no, I'm lucky. I'm happy. I don't have to do CVs anymore. It's a labor intensive job. So
what you are famous for a prediction made, and I've read about it, but could you explain to the audience briefly, what did you do and why was it so special? And why was that kind of your marquee claim to fame with the prediction that you made, I think, about the 20 midterms?
Yeah, sure. In fact, I've just put out an election update on my Substack. It's called The Cycle on Substack, if people want to check it out. That kind of rehashes that, right? So it's right fresh in my mind. And it's easy to answer. Like, what I did was I brought political science literature from the academy into the general consciousness, the stuff we see on 538 or Dave Wasserman or whatever, Nate Cohen, Nate Silver, all those guys. They're not trained political scientists. They don't have PhDs. Now, they are practitioner-wise pretty skilled at what they're doing. And what they're doing is telling you what things are doing today. But because I don't have that formal theoretical training, in part, I think they're not so great at anticipating where things are going. And so for me, it all actually started with frustration. I was nobody. I had 600 followers on Twitter, and I was looking at their analyses, coming out, and I'm like, man, these guys don't even mention college, polarization. They don't understand the educational realignment, and they sure as hell don't get that in 2016. What happened was we sleptwalked ourselves into Trump, right? Like it was complacency and basically a spoiled, rotten temper tantrum after sitting fat for 8 years under Obama and assuming a forever progressive majority. People got very nitpicky in 2016, right? And as a political scientist who studied polarization, particularly this concept called negative polar partisanship, which is the fear, threat, or hate that you feel in relation to the opposition party in our two-party system. It was, to me, quite obvious they needed 23 seats in the House. And it was quite obvious to me based on the demographics of Republican-held districts with a lot of college-educated voters. I mean, we talk all the time about how working class voters are shifting to the right, but no one mentions that. But that cost of doing that with grievance politics has been to isolate college-educated Republicans who used to be a really strong hold in the Republican Party. And so I knew polarization was going to have a massive impact, that it wasn't being accounted for in the analyses or the models. And I wanted people to know what was happening. So I started aggressively pushing my own stuff. And I was a pollster for 5 years at my university as well. I ran the Wasson Center with my colleague Quentin Kidd, and I did horse race polling on, 5 years of horse race polling in Virginia. So all of that combined for a level of like, hey, millions of people are reading this stuff. No one knows about us political scientists. And, this analysis stuff that they're putting forward to the public is way behind the times.
Let me ask this just so that people can understand. You're saying that Nate Silver, some of the people that we see on very politically wonky deep dive news shows don't actually have the academic background in political polarization. And so we're missing small signs that you were paying attention to. And while their heart's in the right place, they just didn't have that professional training to pick up on everything. And you did, and you started to highlight that. Is that a fair summary?
That basically is it. Yeah. And I thought, at the time I was like, well, if I show them this new thing, they'll hire me, they'll bring me in, it'll make their shit better, right? That's not what happened. You can go and Google that if you want to, but that's not what happened. They were not happy about me scooping them in that blue wave. That's for sure.
Hold on. So you're doing something good for progressives. You're explaining something on how progressives in the Blues team could win. And a lot of analysts didn't like you for doing that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I have tits, dude. You don't want to make 5 men wrong when you have tits. I'm just telling you. I mean, that's, not a good idea.
Mom, I told her early on that she could talk like that. So don't talk to me after this and you're upset. I didn't
Your
tell her.
Your mom knows it's the boobs too. I promise you, because she has her own boobs, so she should know, right? Like, really, it was a combination of things. And I'm going to be fair to Nate. They never are fair to me. I'm always trying to be fair to them. I try to talk about the value of what they do, which is really good encapsulation of where we're at right now in terms of polling data. Okay, but it was hard for them because of the way the media kept referring. They all had pretty good cycles of analysis, and then here comes this outsider and the media is like, she's the one that got it right. And like, technically we all ended up in the same place. My scoop was that I did it in July, So,
okay.
It's a combination of things, I mean, as a woman, you can be anything but loud and self-confident. If you're those two things, it can be pretty bad.
Well, what about Amy? She is a woman analyst, I believe, at PBS.
Walter?
I think so.
Amy
Walter. Did she?
Yeah.
Did she attack you too? That's not
no,
cool?
No. Amy and I, we don't have we're not friends. We did an event once together, an analysis event together, and she did not join in, but at the same time, when Nate Silver, Nate Cohen, and Dave Wasserman don't like you, there is a powerful incentive for other people to stay the fuck away from you. Right?
Yeah. Nate Silver and Dave Wasserman.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, they got that 400-pound weight
so
to them.
That's okay though, because honestly, what I decided after that year anyhow was my focus was really on strategy. When I was a professor and I taught campaigns and elections and political behavior, my system of doing that was always just a little bit different than what you might get in the class next door on the same topic. And that's because my interest has always been really hyper focused on strategic choices, right? Tactics are how you execute strategy. Strategy is how is the plan to win, right? And my emphasis was always on that stuff. And, you know, on election night in 2020, I had felt very strongly that the Democratic nominee would win in 2020. And this is before the pandemic even came in. So confident, I published it in the New York Times.
Wow.
And months and months and months before the election, right? And then the pandemic came in, and, you know, as a person who's talked to 200 and some odd polarization experts, which I applaud you for doing, and I'm sure many of them are, you know, much better technical academics than I am. So I stand on their shoulders.
No. Everybody's an expert in different subjects. You are you're coming at it with this kind of like expert novice. Best way to know how to explain it was there was a book called The Book of Five Rings in Japan, in medieval Japan. There were all these master samurai, and then one day this guy came out and he could do samurai stuff with 2 arms. Nobody ever saw him before, and he defeated every samurai in the island and became the top samurai, and they wrote the Book of the Five Rings. You kind of strike me as that guy. Like you came out of the woods with samurai skill, and they're like, who is this person? You haven't gone to any of our fancy schools. You haven't been blessed by samurai master this. And you're like, yeah, go ahead, but watch. 2 swords, I'm better than everybody. And that guy made a lot of enemies too. Not for being a mean guy, just because there was a lot of butthurt samurai who were like, what does he think he's the best? I've studied at this school, and I know all these people, and I studied under Master X. You're talking about, here's Nate Silver, Wasserman, gigantic names. And you're going,
yes.
Yeah, I found
people
something
I really respected.
I wasn't used to hearing that, and I wasn't used to hearing sexism on the left, and thank you for exposing that. It's not okay.
Yeah, you know, one of my academic papers, I'm not sure if it's one that you pulled up because it was co-authored, but it showed how much stronger sexism effects were in 2016 on the left. Granted, that's because Republicans are sexist as hell and hate Hillary Clinton. But, you know, there's still a lot of sexism for sure. And it's not isolated to Republicans. I will tell you that. And every woman knows that. So
I'm dismayed.
So back to the story, though. Listen, what happened with Cohen and all those guys? It was a blessing in disguise because, like, you know, obviously, if you're going to get cut at the knees by those guys, you're not going to be an election forecaster. Okay? And I pride myself on being a strategic genius, right? So, like, so I'm like, okay, look, anyway, election night confirmed for me that I was going to leave that world aside. I had done what needed to be done. They never acknowledge that they've absorbed parts of my stuff, whatever, right? But I had done what I needed to do, and my attention turned on election night, and I'll tell you why. I had tanked my academic career to be not a non-normalizer of Donald Trump. My university president was a Republican senator. I was up for a tenure conversion. They canceled the entire search that year to get rid of me. Like, I chose, either be a truth teller or be an academic, and I chose to be a truth teller. But the election night was great, right? Because for me, if I'm telling you, I know things that Silver and Wasserman and those guys don't. I knew we had won. I knew we had won by like polls closing time on election night. The task, the monumental, sleep necessary task of getting Donald Trump away from the power that he had as president, right?
Right.
But it wasn't like 15 minutes later, and it felt great, right? 15 minutes later, the House results start coming in. And it's clear to me, Democrats have managed to lose a segment of House, as it turns out to be like 19 or whatever it was. With people who voted for Biden, right? They voted for Biden and then voted for Republican House candidates. And I knew that in 2022, this thing called the midterm effect was becoming. It's one of the most important fundamentals in my discipline of American politics, campaigns and elections, right? And that it would be brutal, that Democrats had won in 18 because despite the strategies, not because of them, because of the Trump backlash effect. That is what powered us all the way through election night on 2020. And if they couldn't utilize that down ballot in 2020 against a man who was killing like 2,000 Americans a day from his incompetence, okay, and a party that was holding hostage in the Senate for months, something called the HEROES Act, right? It was the second round of COVID stimulus spending. I knew that we were going to get slaughtered in 2022 electorally, and that if we did, what would happen is today you and I would be sitting here, it'd be September 5th or 4th of 2024, and we would be looking at the very real reality of the election administration stuff we see in Georgia, where they're trying to put in processes to not accept the vote. We would be seeing that across the swing map if 2022 had gone poorly, right? So I talk about that in the book, and that I decided at that point, I might as well translate some of this nerd fame, because it's not real fame, it's nerd fame. No one knows who I am, okay?
I did.
Into trying to network into the Democratic Party. Now, I didn't come up through that system either. So that the samurai outsider thing, that's true for both counts. I was a deadhead, dude. I did Grateful Dead tour. I went to a community college. I was a single mom, I've done shit none of those people could even comprehend, right? Like,
right.
So I didn't have that wonk network that you need for the Beltway media, but I also didn't have the trench experience that is typical to how you move up through campaigns. Okay, you start low, and you're building your way up, and you get those network develops, and that's what builds that. But I did have contact with Jamie Harrison, who had come off of a very hot Senate run in South Carolina, where he really kind of just ran. Jamie's campaign was very good. It was just, very impossible race to win. And then they tapped him to run DNC. And I thought, this is a man that gets it. Let me see if I can get to him. And that's really what I focused on.
And that is the co-author for the book?
Nope, that's Jamie Harrison, the chair of the Democratic National Committee.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Whose work for the last couple of years has left us in a position to save democracy in 2024, and who is a big evangelical for the work that I'm doing. Yeah.
I walked into that. Aaron Murphy.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about my co-author. Aaron is old hand on Capitol Hill,
right.
Whatever they do there, staffers.
Right.
Montana politics is his thing. And, I actually was introduced to him as, do you want a ghostwriter? I'm like, oh, do you want to pay me to write a book? And I don't even have to write the book. Shit, dude, this is already better than the Academy,
So
then I was like, no, I don't want a ghostwriter, but I would be interested in a named co-writer. He's technically co-author, he's technically a co-writer because I'm the content, right? And it's not written in the plural sense, the book, right? But he is very much as instrumental. I mean, the book is the reason why I wanted him incentivized, named and paid well, was because I knew this book was the most important thing I will ever write. And that if I didn't do it right, that people were going to suffer, right? So he is the reason it reads so well, the reason it is so good at what you said, which is like you open it and you get it, right? That's right, Aaron's influence, and I'm very, very happy to have it.
For the record, for everybody, the thoughts came from Rachel. The fine tuning to make it easy to read was from her partner. So just to be clear on who did what. You were introduced to him. So that sounds like a lucky break. Like somebody goes, here's an insider. Here's somebody who could make your nerdy wonkiness, which I love, actually user-friendly for the public. I can't tell you the number of times I'm trying to get a book published on the interviews I've done here. My mom was saying the same thing. This is so wonky. And I go, but it's rich data and it's true.
And Aaron's just incredible. Yeah. Aaron's just incredible in his own right too. He's running the Ryan Bussey for Montana governor's race. And if you take a look at that material, and especially their social content and the strategy, which is to really highlight his Republican opponent's property tax hike, why he gave himself property tax cuts, right? He's a great strategist in his own right. Yeah.
Let's get into some of the meat and potatoes. By the way, this is the first academic study that the doctor wrote. Actually, let me get down to that. The book. She was on MSNBC. We'll get to that in a second. This is the first academic
Well,
study.
that's still shot.
I was trying to get different ones, and I wanted to get one where you're clearly in dialogue.
There's no such thing as a good photo of me. Don't worry.
Hold on. Just so that you don't.
I'll save you that. I'll save you that ambition, dude. Just
see. I got here's one of the back. You look real professional talking to this guy, and then I got one of you.
That guy is Willie Geist.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep,
And then
yeah.
you got to meet you. You got to talk one-on-one with Claire McCaskill. So that's really damn impressive. And then you were also on Book TV. Which is great.
That was fun. That was a bucket list, right? I mean, politics and prose book talk, right? Yeah.
I loved the Q&A on this. So I read your blog on Arizona, then I read the Salon article, and then I reread them 2 or 3 times. But I focused a lot on the Q&A of this, and then the very quick, this MSNBC interview was pretty quick. And just to get kind of like you can understand somebody reading something, and then you got to see him speak and talk to get the other vibe of like, where are you coming from and why did you write this? And is this really important to you? Or is this just, I'm just writing a book to get my name out there? And it's very clear when somebody looks at your interviews that you are about it and you are passionate on this subject. Before we get into what the book is, I just want to say this. I am Latino. I don't spend a lot of time focusing on that. Thank you for standing up for Latin people. I've read about 30 to 40 of these political books. Most of them are by Caucasian people, which is fine. And none of them do that, whether they're on the left or the right. So you had pointed out.
Thank you.
I'm not joking. They don't. And you did it twice. You made it very clear that Trump is racist against Latin people. I've been saying that. I've gotten into numerous arguments. I'm here in the Central Valley. There's a lot of Trump supporters, and they're like, well, they lied about him on this, and they lied about him on that. And I'm like, he still said racist stuff about Mexicans. So let's get it clear. If you're like, well, this is wrong. And okay, fine. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact he came down and he said, it's not racist. It's they're rapists. Whoopsie. I got passionate here. He said they're rapists. Some maybe fine people, maybe. It was clear. And then the foreigners sneaking across our border aren't even worthy of descriptors we use for human beings like refugees or undocumented or immigrants. It's, aliens. And those are truths. Illegals. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm unable to talk about this completely dispassionate.
It's about making the moral. So listen with the illegal shit, right? I mean, here's the thing. Like, if you're going to give me an opportunity to talk about what's coming to Latinas, I have to take it, right? On his website, on Trump's own website, go Google it. On his campaign website, he's got this thing called Agenda 47, which is what he'll do with his Project 2025 power. Okay, and in that, a crazy, list of shit included with, getting rid of the entire Department of Education. He talks about mass deportations. Okay. And they are planning day one, they said, mass deportations. Now you might think, well, yes, Rachel, because everyone hates the migrants. Let's get the migrants out. The 7 million migrants that showed up this year. Right. That's who they're talking about, and that's who they're going to get out. No, I'm here to tell you guys, dude, the foundational ideology of the MAGA's white nationalism is the Great Replacement theory. Okay. The Great Replacement theory argues that Latinos are coming up from South America and lower North America to infiltrate the US, to turn it brown, and to come after the white majority. Great Replacement theory. It's not about black folk, because the American population for blacks is stagnant. It has been static for decades. What has changed since the 60s and comprehensive immigration opening is our Latina population and the Asian population, especially Latina population. When they're talking about you next, okay, they may not get to you first, but once they go for the migrants and they have this mass deportation system, I want you to think about that dreamer kid, the one that was brought here at 2. He's never been to Guatemala. Okay, he's as American as you and I, and anybody listening to this. You're going to be making decisions about whether we should hide him in your attic from deportation police, right? So let's just make sure we understand the threat. It's a real threat, and it's very hard for humans to accept that terrible things can happen in a civilized society, which is why I spent 3-4 years now really studying the Nazis and the Third Reich. I'm here to tell you, your skepticism is part of their power, right? We have to believe what they will do, what they say they will do.
When Trump was in power, and just for my stepdad, yes, I understand not everything they said was accurate. I get it. But these things were. They had the detention centers for illegals. I'm going to do my best. Sorry. Undocumented people.
No, it's okay. But you see how they do that, right? Like that's not, and you know what? That's not an accident, right? Because they have to do that. They have to dehumanize the target, whether it be immigrants from South and Lower North America or Jews, right? You have to flip the morality around, right? And so that use of illegal, which you can't help but put in your head, okay? You can't help it because you hear it all the time. Yeah. Like they've done that to millions of people, and that is why we're on this red fire alarm fire thing that I've devoted my life to fixing.
I want to show you something, but and I promise everybody I'll go back to the normal markers you see when we get back to the meat and potatoes. But just real quick, I am a Latin person. I don't like to spend a lot of time focusing on it, but it is part of my identity. When Trump was here, we had the detention centers. I think one was, it means ascension in Spanish. I forget the name of it. Like you're going to a higher place. A guy died there. So he did ascend to heaven. He died on the thing. They don't have an explanation for why. They just found him all beaten up, and he had a bunch of tubes, and then he died on the incubator, and his wife got to watch him die. There was also a American citizen who was held in detention in that camp for 5 days before they accidentally realized he was a citizen, just accidentally forgot or lost his citizenship, or I don't know. And they beat the dog crap out of that guy. So citizens who were Latin were beaten, and undocumented immigrants were killed in that facility. On top of, you had many Latin communities who lived in terror. There were communities here throughout California. We have undocumented throughout here in California. I'm naturalized, my mom is, but many other people aren't. 400 people just leave a city in the afternoon because they're terrified. And they leave all their children and daughters and granddaughters around, and they don't know where they went. That's pretty damn scary. And if I may, let me do this, please. You were talking about how you noticed stuff and the experts didn't pick up on it. So, I got it. I'm here in the Valley, and it's a lot of, here we go. Trump's not racist. And did you see his RNC speech? And, he loves Asians and Latinos and Black people, right? And I'm like, okay, but I never saw the media bring this up. He sat right next to Jason Aldean, and he saluted him at the speech. Jason Aldean was the guy who wrote that "Don't Try That in a Small Town," which was filmed in front of the White House to hang a Black man dead. And he goes, well, I don't know how we, I don't know how we accidentally filmed it in front of it. And the whole video is about the front of that courthouse. And he goes, just the producer picked that. I don't know. And then he was, accidentally caught doing blackface earlier. So when I hear him going, I'm not racist, and I'm like, but you accidentally did blackface before. Okay. There it is. There's the courthouse where a Black man was hung, last one. And he goes, I don't know how that happened. Here he is as defending himself in blackface. This is the guy who sat right next to Trump in his box, and he got a salute. Then we go to JD Vance. A lot of people, and it's it's disgusting because my mom is full-blood Mexican. She liked this guy when she read Hillbilly Elegy. She goes, "Oh, I get it." And I go, "Mom, did you see his commercial where he won the election, right? He wasn't even going to be in. It was a tight race. And then he had to release this commercial asking people, are you racist? Do you hate Mexicans?" And then going on to explain how his family died because of fentanyl from Mexicans. By the way, after he ran this race on that ad, Donald Trump immediately took interest into him. That's now his vice president. There he is, Vice President J.D. Vance, who ran on "Do you hate Mexicans?" in order to break the tie and become the person he is there to even be picked up by Trump. And then my favorite one was Trump's deportation plan is, and I remember when he goes, "I want Eisenhower did the great thing." Immediately as a Latin person, I knew exactly what that was called Operation Wetback. Literally.
Yes, it was. I was
and yes,
trying not to ruin your punchline there.
No, thank you. They call it Operation Wetback, or as my abuela would say, bajado trabajando. So wetback working. But I can say that. Please don't go around saying wetback. It's considered offensive to Latin people, unless you know them really well. Blah, blah, blah. So,
if you're Donald Trump and JD Vance,
or if you're Donald Trump or JD Vance, I'm not excusing it for them, but they'll probably do it anyways. Especially not on camera. Yep. And that's why I'm showing people this. This is all in his RNC speech. Operation Wetback. They pushed so many Latin people out. They even threw out citizens. Didn't care if you had the papers, you're gone. And they threw out Russians who were in the area into Mexico, which is why now you have Mexicans with the name Ivan. I've met them. So didn't care about citizens, didn't care about rights, pushed them out. Trump in his speech is talking about Jason Aldean, and he's talking about my vice president, this guy who said, "I hate Mexicans." And then he's talking about how his thing that he wants to do is do better than the Eisenhower plan, which was called Operation Wetback, and pushed American citizens, Russia and Russians, out of the country. And I didn't see anyone pick up on this in the media, just like you're saying, hey, I came up with this model and no one picked up. And I'm like, the left media is always talking about Trump's racist. And I'm like, it's right in our face. He didn't say it. He did that dog whistling thing where he said, I didn't say that. Bro, it's very clear what you're intimating here. Dog whistle politics, dog whistling racism. I did a whole show on that, but nobody picked up on that. Anyways, that was just to let everybody know who they really are and who they're advertising right in front of everybody. Let's get to the meat and potatoes.
And the fact is that, the statistics, right? White population's declining, and it will be we're basically at the border of being majority minority, right? Which means all the minority groups make a majority and the whites become a minority, which in their mind means at that point, right? They're all going to look like, and there's been such great academic research on this. Not from me, but and not even really necessarily from political scientists that really talk about, especially disadvantaged, socioeconomically poor whites, right? This thing that they have, this idea of a racial hierarchy, like that's the thing that they have, right? Like they may not be able to feed their kids and they keep voting for Republicans that are stealing all their shit, right? But like the thing they have is they're better than the black people down the street, right? That's what powers all of it. We can talk about it. We have to talk about it and we have to face it head on. We have to understand like that the Republican Party has been tapping into that on purpose. And, that it's left us in a position where the Latino community is facing what I would call existential crisis. Yeah,
I would agree. Again, I don't agree with all the policies on everybody's side, but it's kind of clear there is a white flight, deep rooted fear. Every time I hear the phrase horde or invasion, that's the way they talk about the Mongols coming across the border, like this foreign group is going to take everything away. I'm like, I'm very aware of the word use. But it's just a silly theory because according to the U.S. Census, white voters will be the dominant voters. I didn't say people, voters, until the year 2045. Because most people are older when they vote, and we're looking, they're going, oh, we're being replaced. Yeah, by babies who can't vote for another 25 years. You're like really over exaggerating the threat here. They're not even adults. They're small children. You have 2 more decades. Additionally, Myra Flores in Texas this concept that Latin people move to a neighborhood and then automatically vote Democrat. Latin people may vote conservative. So you may not be replaced. You may find neighbors who share your values and shouldn't be seen as outsiders or foreigners. It's not necessarily replacement. Latin people have this weird thing where they adopt the political climate of the area they move to, almost like they're individuals and American citizens. And that's just kind of what they do. And they're not this monolith. So let's get to something I cannot be emotional about. Rachel, what is the meat and potatoes? What is this book trying to do? And by the way, before you answer, Salon, Rachel BITECOFER's Tough Love Lessons for Democrats. This is an excellent review of it. Additionally, she had a blog for Arizona, Hidden Where It Hurts. I recommend anybody that wants to do additional reading, buy the book, but then go read these two essays. What were these essays saying? What is the book about? What is your what's the point of the book and why now?
Yeah, so that's great. That's great. Now we're going to go back into what I've been doing for the last year or so.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's talking about why I wrote this book and what this book is designed to do. And it really is a 3-part book. And the very first part I knew was going to be a very important part of the book, because in that part of the book, I try to get people like you and people who listen to you on this program to understand how unicorn they actually are in terms of political interest and thus political knowledge. Okay. Average people are unable to articulate almost anything about politics. They know there's 2 parties, Democrat or Republican. Most of them lean or have a preference for one of those brands. They know who the president is. They're learning who Kamala Harris is because, believe it or not, only about 25% of people don't even know who the vice president is in any given election. Mm-hmm. If you think about what that means, then, if you're sitting there watching a motion to vacate, like, it's not a shared reality. Like, you can't go into the grocery store after. So, like, 2 events I can use that are great comparisons. I can go to the grocery store right after the Olympics, the NBA, come back with Steph Curry, sleep in, great moment. Some dudes walking by, man, did you see Steph Curry? Oh, it was great. Okay. If I tried that with like a motion to vacate, people would be like, that woman is insane. What is she talking about? Okay. Average people don't know who Kevin McCarthy is. They don't even know who Mike Johnson is. They won't know unless he's in there for years and we start advertising more effectively with him in it. Like, they'll never know he exists. Okay. So that's the information base of the electorate. And that's what's astounding is that these are, and when I said shit hadn't transferred over to the political world, there is nothing more foundational that has never translated over into the analysis world than this hard, cold fact. The American electorate is neither informed nor engaged. Okay. Neither of those things. And that's the electorate. The population, the adult population, you swipe it in half. Okay. So take a football stadium of 100,000 fans and take half of them. Those people don't even vote at all, let alone so we're not talking about the voters know a lot and the non-voters know a lot. The non-voters know nothing and they don't care. The voters have at least been socialized into civic participation, but they aren't you and me. They're watching cooking shows and hunting shows and celeb shit. Their Twitters don't look like ours. They never see political content unless it's paid to drop in an ad in front of them. They don't have an interest. Okay. So access matters. Yes, the structural system, and I lay that out in the book, how, compulsory voting systems get better civic culture. All of that matters, right? But at the end of the day, what has happened in this country is we have socialized generation after generation to believe that they can completely ignore a government that's supposed to be for the people, by the people. Okay. And now we are yielding a crop because of the information age in which the chickens have come home to roost. So it's not their fault. And in the book, I talk about how people will tell you, oh, I feel bad. I skipped my Peloton workout today, but we'll be proud to tell you they don't vote. Very proud, because in their mind, they're morally superior to you, a person who votes, because of how gross politics is. I'm sure you've had a conversation
absolutely,
like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the first half of the book, after 6 months of lecture tour and talking and working with people on this topic, I can tell people that. I can tell a whole audience of people that, and they hear it and they can see it in data because I have ways of showing it in data, but they can't really internalize what that means, because what it means is foundational for our electoral strategy. Our electoral strategy at that point shifts from what it's always been, or in our mind, which is we've got these informed, engaged voters, and your policy has to be better, and this and that, and bipartisan, and all this. That electorate doesn't even exist. Okay, but the electorate has to be shaped. Their public opinion has to be shaped with top line narratives, and most people are voting purely on party identification because of that. So we've known this since 1950 something, when surveys first got common, because telephone lines got common enough to representatively sample America. Nerds like me sitting around Columbia, they're all dudes, of course, because no tits in Columbia in 1950, right? Decide, hey, we can measure what the electorate knows. Let's go do that, right? So they field this great study. It's called The American Voter, if you ever want to check it out. It's a foundational text in my discipline. And here's the two findings, guys. Number one, they find out voters don't know anything other than who the president is and this loose allegiance to the brands. They know they have a separation of powers and checks and balances, but they would be unable to articulate to you how that works. Okay. It begins and it ends in the White House. If it doesn't happen, it's the president's fault. If it does, it's the president's fault. You can see that in Joe Biden's data to today, right? But don't worry, these political scientists go on to write, because our research has also revealed something very interesting. They don't need to know anything because they have a cognitive shortcut that they can use. And that cognitive shortcut in our system, our very unique two-party system, is the D and the R. Because it allows them to sort the political universe without doing any of the mental work it takes. When you're not interested in something, devoting mental energy to it is very difficult. For example, I am not into NASCAR. I cannot name a NASCAR driver. Like, I might know, loosely speaking, there's Talladega, because Talladega Nights, right? I know that. That's kind of similar to what somebody would know about President Biden, President Trump, President Bush, or President Obama.
Clever. Okay.
Right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I don't have all this rich detail that we're getting from our interest to contextualize that, right? And so, the other thing that I'm modernizing things for, and had to modernize the election bros with, was the it's not that partisanship is important in American politics. It's just kind of where they were at, right? It's that partisanship is everything. It's everything.
Now.
It's everything for 90% of the electorate, which includes a big chunk of the so-called independents that we'll watch all month, this next 2 months, of them with their swing voter panels and the focus groups and the guy on the stump and whatever, right? That, guys, most people are not independent. They lean left.
Thank you.
Right. When they lean, the data don't lie, okay? And I go through and I show people, look, Raphael Warnock's race against Herschel Walker, a man who is not only incompetent, but also paid for an abortion, right? You look at that data, folks. It wasn't because Republicans were like, this guy is no good. He violated our most important moral code. They voted 96% for him. The independents didn't, okay? They broke for Warnock. So getting people to understand, like, if you're bleaching partisanship out of your election strategy, you're doing it wrong at the very base level. So my work then goes on, because it's not up here in the branches, like where a lot of the reform effort has always taken place on the left, because we've had this problem for a long time, and there's other people who have tackled it, right? I argue like that tackling has happened up here, when what happens is foundationally, it's the root and the branch, okay? It's the assumption of an informed, engaged electorate and ignoring the power of partisanship and vote choice, and thus the importance of brand identity, brand awareness, brand perception, right? And so the back half of the book is really about laying out, look, we've known about some of the asymmetries. They've built this. It's not like we're in this situation organically. What we're facing now, folks, is not an organic situation. It's a situation that was articulated through billions of dollars of investment in Republican infrastructure and purposeful especially since Trump, purposeful efforts to program the brain. So propaganda, right? The big lie is probably the best example of that. Purposeful propaganda designed to victimize the aggressor. Okay, the aggressor becomes the victim, and designed to drive people nuts, right? And I lay out that infrastructure and how we have to get serious. This is a party that runs on elbow grease. I mean, we've got 500 different groups doing youth turnout. None of them are centralized. None of them are funded. I mean, a couple of them have some funding, but mostly it's grassroots. Okay, they have Turning Point USA, which is focused on just youth turnout, and it is funded at $80 million annual budget by a millionaire or a couple, right? Like we don't have that infrastructure. We have to get serious about building it. We have to understand that we need pro-democracy infrastructure. If there's going to be infrastructure, anti-democratic infrastructure purposely being built and deployed, then there has to be the equivalent on the other side. We have to find philanthropists who are willing to get off the nonpartisan sidelines, because it's one thing for Bill Gates to give money to mosquitoes, okay? Because no one's going to hate you for that. But will he give money for democracy, right? We need to build that infrastructure. And then, in the tail end, it's really about getting people in position to understand, okay, if you accept everything I've argued, and you should, because it's the truth, then how are we supposed to do this? And it really is about getting people to recognize it's not base mobilization messaging and persuasion messaging where you're trying to sell Val Demings and she's a sheriff and she rides a motorcycle and she's going to be no, like they don't do it like that. And they stopped doing it like that a long time ago. They have one message. That message is the Democrats are scary. This guy's a Democrat. All Democrats are bad. Democrats are scary. Right. And they don't give you quarter if you're actually truly a moderate or don't want to defund the police. They brand you with this hyperbolic label regardless, right? And so a lot of the work this last couple of years, because of Dobbs, it really helped, because I'm like, talk about freedom. Now it helped us crystallize it into a very real way that's having real world implications for women. And that's why we're going to see the abortion initiatives in Nevada, Arizona, and Florida, I think, matter a lot.
Yeah, I heard it's on the ballot or something in Florida. It's an additional issue there. Just to back you up, so that study came out in the 1950s, and it said, yes, the American people are largely uninformed about politics and the differences, but don't worry, there's the two parties. I believe the study also said the way to make democracy better is to make the two parties even more different from each other and in a publicly acknowledgeable way. So don't align. Split off, attack each other, go in different directions. That's how we make democracy better. That's what they said in the 1950s with that study.
I know. I wish I could resurrect Lazarus. I think his name is Lazarus, by the way, which is kind of ironic. I wish I could resurrect him.
Yeah, this study's easy to find for everybody.
No, the last thing we needed were two distinct parties, but it goes to show like everything's nuanced. Everything's nuanced. So every action's going to cause reactions, right? And so they get what they want. They get these two distinct parties, and now we're at the precipice of it destroying democracy.
we are doing what the study recommended to do to make democracy better, and it is not working for democracy. However, they made that prediction 70 years ago. The world was very different, 1950s America versus 2024 America. So
it was,
but they were wrong.
And for people who are of a certain age, I mean, I'm of enough of an age where I lived two lives: pre-digital revolution, post. Okay, very different, very, very different. Yeah. I don't think people ever sit around and really conceptualize how different information is, especially, right? Information is completely different. How you get it, where you get it, what you get. You could not avoid information in 1980. It was going to come to you by accident one way or the other through a news program while you're flipping, because you have to watch the commercials and there's a news promo and there's newspaper boxes everywhere and people actually talk to each other in public instead of being on their phones. Yeah. So you found shit out whether you wanted to know it or not, right? We're living now, guys, and we're in this uncharted world where people have no information. They don't want it. And the algorithms know they don't want it. So they keep it away, right? And that's why, the book's purpose is to turn each person into kind of a siren, right? Somebody is going out and telling people what is happening in the modern Republican Party and why it's a threat for their own health, wealth, safety, and freedom.
Let me ask you this question just as a sideway. You had, I know that's not spelled right. Sorry, I'm doing this on the fly.
No, it's very
Algorithms
good.
and permanent campaigns. You should be able to get the idea. So you had recommended in here, well, I don't know if you recommended, but there were 2 points in the book where I saw you go, part of the problem besides this and the other stuff we talked about is that we now live in these media bubbles. The algorithms are there. They're designed to force feed you information that keeps you emotionally attached and engaged. Maybe that was a benign idea by social media originally when they started, but now it's turned into how angry and upset and emotionally charged can we make you by constantly feeding you these emotional pills of information. And we'll make sure that you don't get stuff that doesn't fit that narrative because you don't like that naturally anyways. So we've kind of removed the function of the news where when you read the newspaper, and I remember the newspaper as a boy, you'd see articles you liked right next to articles you didn't like. There was no way to avoid it. You had to read.
And you saw those headlines.
Yeah. So you're like,
you had to read the headline and decide if you wanted to read it. You know what I mean? Like you had to see it. It was there, right?
Yeah.
And here's the thing, our algorithms are tweaked now for rage, right? But like what the social media companies found out with Facebook, really, right, was that actually people who don't like politics, if you show them shit that's political or hard news, they log off. So like, it's not so much the problem. I mean, yes, the rage problem is a problem. Let's say it's not a problem, but the other problem that no one ever talks about is that many, many millions, 80% of a user base on X does not want political content and will disengage if given it. And so therefore is not given political content at all.
And they want to stay ignorant and the system helps them to stay there.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Because if I'm X and you hate politics, why would I want you to see it and get offline? Right? I'm gonna
yeah.
Into.
I have friends who go down conspiracy avenue, and I like conspiracy theories for entertainment. I like action movies. I like Marvel movies. I'm like, oh, that's a fun story. And so I've seen many of them going, well, this is designed to tear us apart and designed to get us. And I could see how, if you're an American sitting in this situation and how we used to have normal news or news not based upon algorithms, and now we do, and we're tearing it apart, it could look like there's maybe a nefarious hand. But my understanding was this was about money. They wanted to keep you engaged on that platform as much as possible. And they figured out with psychologists and sociologists, the buttons to press in your head to keep you glued.
Yep.
And we are emotional beings. And we are more, like you were saying, if you're not well educated on the subject, how do I get you engaged? By teaching you a bunch of facts and dry statistics? No, I emotionally engage you. Bad man, good friend, safe dog. And now you're hooked. And I think they did it for money, but I think it's also been the destruction of the body politic. But I don't think it is.
And I think the platforms did it for money. But the problem is that because they had that system, people especially in this right-wing media scape. I mean, right-wing media, guys, I mean, like every account that's on the right has 1 million, 2 million subscribers. Okay. Like pretty much. Okay. There's an incentive there for fear grifting. In other words, there's big money to be made on the right being a propagandist, and people have recognized that. And so when I say it's not organic, I mean, I'm telling you, the platforms may not have meant it to happen, but the purveyors, the people who are using them did. And what they wanted to do is drive people insane. And it has worked because we're in a situation right now where it's not 10 million people. It's not 5 or 20% of Republicans. We're talking about 70, 80% of Republicans sincerely, because academics have researched this, sincerely believe the election was stolen from them in 2020. It's something that not just there's no evidence to support, because I keep hearing media say that every time. No. We did a forensic autopsy, the likes of which the world has never seen on 2020. We know that there was no fraud because of those forensic autopsies. There's never been a more autopsied election in the history of this country. So we know there was no fraud. Okay. It's not just that they couldn't prove it. We know that there wasn't. And yet 80% of them think that. Now, imagine you being one of those 8 of 10 Republicans. You're living in a reality where we're the baddies. We stole democracy from you. Okay. I that you want to know why people were angry and stormed the Capitol. They believe that, right? If you believe that, then anything could be justified to do to Latinos if you believe they're invading you, right? And they're coming to rob and rape and pillage you. Anything is justified, right? And that's why, it's so important for people to understand. It's not organic.
Well, okay. One of the questions that I had asked the other professors was, if I gave you a magic wand, you pretend this pen is actually a magic wand and I can virtually pass it through to you and you grab this, and this magic wand, you go poof, and the world changes exactly how you want it. People think what you want. Governments are doing stuff. You could even rewrite history. It's basically Thanos' ring. If I gave you this and you had this power, could you undo the damage the algorithms have done? Can we undo this in society? Can we go back to not this? Really?
Mm-hmm.
How's that? How do we get rid of this?
Frustrating part is that's the frustrating part, is that it's all infinitely fixable, but we don't have the governmental, but the problem is the problem controls the tools to the fix. Do you see what I'm saying? So, to answer your question, this is what we need to do in America. Number one, we are atypical. Nobody understands this, but elections here are very different. Speech here is very different. In other countries, you can't be a far right fear grifter that just makes up shit about people like Laura Loomer and then enrich yourself off of it, because you will get in trouble with the law. You can't, There's no right to lie in free speech in the other Western democracies. We are militant in our constitutional interpretations. And I always thought that was a good thing, but it comes with a cost. We've got dumb voters who know nothing about civics, who are highly susceptible to propaganda, and people willing to exploit that for profit. You are really in a bad spot, right? So what we need in this country are the same protections for consumers for political speech. You can't go on a product and sell it. You get in trouble if you try to lie about your product. We should have that. We should have 60-day campaigns, right? The primary was a really great idea that has been a disaster in practice. Why? Because we don't have the civic culture for a primary. When we look at primary elections in this country, especially at the congressional or Senate level, you're talking about 10% of the electorate deciding who these nominees are going to be. Why? Because we've stolen the heuristic. When you go into a primary election, there's no DNR. I have to actually do something to decide who I want to vote for, right? That's why name ID is so important in primaries. But there's no DNR to make the cognation easy. And that's why most of the electorate doesn't even participate in primaries. So that's a problem, right? And, honestly, truth in advertising would do so much. We need, obviously, to get rid of Citizens United as well. The problem with all of those reforms is that will never happen. And the reason it will never happen is because the corrupt crazies control so much of the system, in a system that's designed to give them outsized power, that it will take some kind of crisis to get them to change, right? So what we could do, but we can't, but we could, if I could wave a magic wand, is we could get rid of the D and the R. We could stop teaching children that it's perfectly acceptable that politics is so gross you shouldn't discuss it at dinner, okay? And that you're better off not engaged in your own government. We have to stop that cultural process, and that's a generational change. I'd like to be able to work on that problem if we can survive this near miss for democracy, right? Hopefully we'll be a near miss, because that's where we have to get in. We have to get in here at the base level and change our culture. We have to get rid of the party labels on the ballots and force people to actually know something about government. It's like, how do you get America to eat its civic vegetables, basically?
Right. I am amazed. This book is Teach Democrats How to Beat Republicans. And you just said maybe the solution is that we don't really have Democrats and Republicans so much. Wow. I was not expecting
ultimately, It's definitely not something that we would want to do unilaterally. So let me case in point.
Fair. I get. Yeah. Fair
Okay?
enough. Fair enough.
Gerrymandering. Like, oh my God. Like, if I could go back in time, I'd be like, yeah, gerrymandering is a really big problem. And Democrats, don't fix it just for yourselves, dumbasses. I mean, we've given up 30 House seats to redistricting fair lines while they're over there amplifying their gerrymanders, right? So, like, you know, we can't let our moral smugness feelings get away from the fact that we have to be pragmatic, and we have to be, because we're up against a dishonest opposition that will not do the right thing, right? Not right now. So I would not want to see any blue states getting rid of the party label, okay, unless it was a national change. And therein lies the problem, guys. Everyone's really frustrated with America. It was designed to frustrate you. It is, in the best of times, very hard to pass legislation. There are many, many opportunities to kill a bill as it goes through the House and the Senate. It has to have each version, they have to get reconciled at the end. You've got the filibuster. You've got the majority party controls the agenda, so nothing happens unless they want to do it in the House. Then you have the constitutional amendment process, which is 3/4 of both states, or 3/4 of the states and 2/3 of both chambers. So we have to be realistic, and I think it's important for us not to set goals that are unattainable. So a lot of the things that people point to for reforms, like, you know, term limits, number one, which are a disaster, have been a disaster at the state level. A lot of the things people want to do require a constitutional amendment. So in other words, there's no cheat. There's no soft way through. If you want your grandchildren to live in a better place, then you're going to have to do the work. It's going to be long-term, grueling work. There's no quick fix like in 1957 where people can just use party ID and they don't need to know jack shit about a government for the people, by the people, right? We have to change that culture. It's going to be a lifetime of work. And I hope people will pick up that banner once I'm dead, because it will probably take 80 years to execute.
So if I may summarize, if we could have consumer protections for voters, truth in advertising for voters, we could start to fight back against the algorithms. If we could start to end the long-term permanent campaigns, that would be a big thing to calm people down. If we could end primaries, we would stop with a small selection of typically extreme people on both sides who are controlling this. However, this is America. Constitutional amendments barely happen. None of those practical, reasonable solutions will ever be allowed. Therefore, the only solution is slow generational change, not immediate, where we teach our children so that hopefully in the future they're not as wed to these labels. Is that a fair summary?
Pretty much, dude. Like, you know, I deal in lead. I don't deal in bullshit. So I'm here to tell you, if we want to make the change, we have to change our civic culture. It will be the work of generations. I do believe it can be done. In fact, from political science, like, there's two things in my voter behavior or my political behavior class I'm teaching kids. I'm teaching them the decision of an American to be a voter or not, okay? Because there's first that decision in our country, maybe not in others, but in our country, and 50% of the country says no to that question, okay? Then you have question two, which is, if you're a voter, who's your vote choice, which is party, right? That first part, guys, is infinitely fixable, and let me tell you why. Every time I do a lecture, doesn't matter if it's 20 or 600 guests, I know that if I say this line, I'm going to get every hand in the room. And I say, how many of you had parents that voted? Every hand will go up, okay? 20 or 600. Your hand just went up, right? I saw it in your eyes, right? Your parents voted. They taught you the importance of voting. That is not happening in 50% of the population. So the intervention obviously comes there, right? And that's really what I hope to get some, you know, philanthropy money to do if we are successful here in the fall and we get through this moment.
Let me ask you about that, getting through this moment. So I had asked many professors, and some of them would say, it's fine. It's not that bad. We had the 60s. We'll get through it. It's fine. Others would say, no, there are definitely things that aren't working that haven't worked. Like, we have more trifecta governments, more use of talking about using the filibuster, There's also more use of cloture. There's all these things that you were talking about that are hard metrics that geeks and wonks know about. But if you look at Congress and its effectiveness, you can clearly see that it's not working, and we're becoming more hyper polarized and separated. The question then becomes, how do we fix it before another January 6th and another one? Because you're saying, hey, here's the solutions. I don't know if we could do it, but here's a slow generational change. Great. That's a 15 to 20 year project. Yeah. 2 years from now, there's another January 6th. 4 years, there's another January 6th. 6 years, there's another January 6th. Can we survive all these January 6th before our children are ready to come online and save us?
No, we can't, frankly speaking. So like when I talk about the wildfire, the problem we just talked about was climate change. Okay. That's climate change, but we got a wildfire and it's burning and it's hot and it is ready to burn down our entire constitutional order. They have a manual called Project 2025. Trump wants to pretend it's not his. Well, it's not written by him, but it was written for him, just like the 1980 was written for Ronald Reagan, who went on, by the way, to implement 60% of it within the first year. And that is, if you're old enough to remember the words Reagan Revolution, that was the Reagan Revolution. Okay. Yeah. So it's a manual that matters. It's going to be implemented. And so here's what we have to do as a country to get the opportunity to do that long-term work that I talk about. We must beat Republicans in this cycle. And if we could hold the Senate, because the House is pretty easy to flip, and the presidency after the switch is, it's advantage us, though it's always going to be close and toss up. We have the advantage where they had the advantage under Biden. But the Senate is an incredibly difficult leap. And that's where the strategy from this book will be most important, right? It's not, we left several Senate races on the table, not running the strategy, running the old stuff in 22, and we're poised-ish to do that again here in 2024. And I've still got time. I'm an eternal optimist, right? So it's September, whatever, still time for you to tell the electorate in Montana that Tim Sheehy's a dangerous extremist that's coming for their freedom. There's still time to tell Bernie Moreno in Ohio that there's dangerous extremists that are coming for your freedom in Ohio, right? There's still time for these things. But I do think that if we could win the Senate, even if it's just one seat or even a presidential, Walz is the tiebreaker, that might be the thing finally that forces this national divorce within the Republican Party. But the future is uncertain and the end is always near, guys, because we are in a moment. It is a moment very much like the Germans faced in the 1920s and the 1930s. So everything that we do today will matter for our children's future tomorrow.
Okay, that's sobering. I heard maybe, hopefully, if we could get one seat in the Senate, we could stop this. Those are tight margins. You're not saying, hey, we're guaranteed to get 2/3 of the Senate. And as long as we get 51%, I hope we get that one person in the Senate to prevent America from collapsing is emotionally what I think I'm hearing from you. I mean, that is exactly what I'm saying. Okay. Just to be clear. I'm a non-educated voter and I'm watching this and I'm going, did she say if we lose a Senate seat, the country's over? I'm like, that sounds like we are teetering.
No, I mean, here's the thing. As long as they don't control the executive branch, guys, we get another round of the game. It's game over only if Trump gets the executive power, because they are going to collapse it into this imperial presidency. And you can't stop that once you don't have the mechanisms. But I don't want to be too despondent. Like the Senate, the trifecta is what we need to force the Republicans to have a moment. And to answer your question, we cannot go on this way. There are Republican politicians, from Trump to the Senate Majority Leader to the House now, the old House, people who are elites, who are opinion leaders. When Donald Trump tells a person that the election was stolen, he's doing it for the presidential seal, right? So that legitimation is so important. If we don't want to be in this position, we have to find a way to either force a Republican reckoning electorally, or find a way to prevent the right to lie, because the right to free speech is right now, especially on the internet, the right to lie. And what people are doing with it is intentionally radicalizing others. And it matters. It killed people in El Paso at a Walmart, Latino people who thought, whose white supremacist Nazi shooter believed deeply in Ted Cruz and Texas, Abbott's invasion rhetoric, right? So we already know people are dying for this rhetoric. So I don't want people to feel hopeless. I feel really hopeful, by the way, from where I was 2 months ago, because of the switch, because of the way Democrats rally behind it. The fact that I'm worried about, can we also get the Senate, also being the key word there, is a really good sign that we've got this. But I'm not going to lie to people. Like, we have a real problem. And the biggest problem is that most of our friends, neighbors, colleagues, coworkers, people next to you in traffic, walking through the mall with you, don't even know there's a problem. Okay. They don't know. They don't have a pit in their stomach. Okay. Yeah.
Well, what about the professors that I interviewed, about 25% of them, who said, Mark, I'm a political science expert. I studied polarization. Calm down. It's going to be fine. We've survived the 1960s. Right. And basically, they are publishing papers and giving analysts that say, it's going to be fine. Don't worry too much. Are those people helpful to this discussion?
No, but they're perfectly predictable in terms of psychology. So like what I wanted to do was, I was like, okay, 3-4 years ago almost now, I was like, dude, this feels really Nazi. Like, is it Nazi? I don't know much about fascism because I am an American. So I heard all about communism my whole life. But until Rachel Maddow wrote her book, I had no idea there was even an American fascist movement, let alone that it was vibrant and only disappeared because of Pearl Harbor, right? And that it infiltrated the government and had senators and stuff involved in it. I never knew any of that history, right? So I go in and start studying, and I start pretty like foundational, like with the Evans book and oh my God, his name is escaping me, William Shire. And, from now I've read hundreds and hundreds of books, but those were where I started. And I wasn't long into the reading where I was like, oh my God, what we think of as Hitler and the Nazis, we're thinking about the 1940s, the war period, that atrocity and industrial scale murder of the Jews. But that's not the right comparison. It sadly could be in the future, but where we want to be looking at is the 1930s, all right? What was the Nazi philosophy? And although hatred of Jews was a major component piece, it is actually culture. They're very upset that the movement of culture, right, away from conservative values, the empowerment of women. They wanted women back in the house, and not just in the house. They wanted them breeding 8 babies a pop. Okay. Like, it was there's a lot of stuff that happened and like ideologically are very similar. But, through the first year, I'm kind of, focused big. Then I start reading diaries. Okay. And I'm going to walk you through something. This is how strong what I call optimism bias is. So what your professor friends have is called optimism bias. It would actually be 75-25 if they weren't all educated polarization experts. Okay. In the normal public, optimism bias is a majority bias. Okay. And it's so strong that I've read diary accounts from Jews who were in Warsaw's ghetto. They got there because the Nazis invaded Poland and took their businesses, which are called Aryanization, gave them to white people, right? Not Gentiles is what they call them, took their home and forced them to move into one part of the city. Then, I shit you not, they're like, you know what? You guys are clustered in here and now you're a disease risk. Okay. So you need to pay for a wall and build it around your ghetto. They made the Jews build and pay for their own wall. Once that wall was there, friend, there were people starving to death on the street. So if you wanted, go out and about, and you had to, because if you weren't working, you were in danger in that ghetto. You're walking against dying children in the streets. Okay. So you've had your business, your house stolen. You've been put in a ghetto. You've been forced to build this wall. And you're hearing rumors now that they're doing deportations east. And what being deported east actually means is being killed. Okay. Being killed, and you're walking over corpse to go get your daily bread. Okay. And still in their diaries, I read things like, I just can't believe that's true. The Nazis would never do that. Okay. That's how powerful our wiring is for optimism. And when I figured that out, it was like the first year of my research, was probably the first tweet I ever publicly made on it. I said, I've been studying the rise of these totalitarian states in the 20th century now for a while, because I didn't just do the Nazis, started bigger. And here's the common thread. People cannot panic in time. They're literally designed not to. Okay? It's an evolutionary thing. So when I meet someone who's skeptical, who says, number one, if I call you a Nazi, it's based on research, not on hyperbole. Okay. Number two, the skepticism is the thing I knew 3 years ago would be our hardest and biggest hurdle to beat.
I didn't know about the term optimism bias. That explains a lot. I was glad there was only 25%. Some of the others said, another thing that scared me, which is why I was asking about, can we make these changes soon enough? They go, well, I don't think we'll go to another group said we'll go to civil war. And then there was another group who said, I don't know. And then there was a final group that was a small amount of them, but scared the hell out of me because they all had not talked to each other. They had not published this idea. And 3 or 5 of them came to the same concept. They go, we're not going to have a civil war. We're not going to turn on each other. We'll just descend to a, quotes, Brazil quality of government and stay there for the next 30 to 40 years. Is that possible?
Certainly is. And, I don't sugarcoat things. And weeks, before the switch, I wrote a column. I'm like, America's going to go through some things, guys. Okay. Because if we lose, we get fascist autocracy. That's very bad. Okay. But if we win, we may see a modern secession movement. Why? Because Republican politicians with that seal of legitimacy that matters so much, and all these influencers, Steve Bannons of the world, are going to tell people that the reason that they lost was that Biden let 7 million migrants, illegals, whatever they call them, come in, moved them all around America, which, by the way, was done by Greg Abbott and DeSantis, right? But now it's us. We moved them all through America into the swing states, and we're going to steal the election. So this is Big Lie 2.0. And just like with Big Lie 1.0, months long of antecedents. That's why, or precedents, which is why it's so frustrating that the media took the big lie as something that had to be disproven, right? When we knew it was going to be a fake lie about election fraud for months and months in advance. And this time, they're going to blame the loss on illegals. How will Greg Abbott, Ron DeSantis lean in on that? Will they go full bore? Because they may find what I have found from reading Eric Larson's excellent new book, which you should definitely read, called what is it? It's got such a great title. I can't remember what the title is, but anyway, it's about the secession, Demon of Unrest. That's what it's called, Demon of Unrest. And it's about the 6 months between Lincoln's election inaugural, or 4 months between that, and how the propaganda ship had sailed. Lincoln's real positions on slavery didn't matter anymore in the South. What mattered was the perception that he was going to come heavy-handed and abolish slavery. That's what provoked secession. We could see, if Republican politicians are going to continue to do this intentional lies to millions of their constituents, we can definitely see bad things happen even if we win.
That's the other question. Is, so let's say Trump is, and I asked a few professors, I go, let's say Trump's gone. Let's say he goes to prison. Let's say he goes to prison for 50 years. And he goes, I'm so despondent, I'm getting out of politics and I will never speak on politics again. Many of them pointed immediately to Ron DeSantis, and they go, actually, Ron DeSantis leaned harder into the culture war than Trump. And Ron DeSantis was trying to get the Trump votes. And the fact is that Trump had 2 impeachment trials. He was defeated in the election. It's now 4 years later, and he's still the top candidate. Maybe his ideas never go away. Like, even if you made the guy magically disappear and all of his kids disappear, do his ideas die off? Or do other Republicans go, wow, he was really good at winning elections, saying that firebrand stuff. And he's trained Republicans to respond to that. I'll say that stuff and I'll get those votes and I'll win. Is that possible?
And that's about 70% of our elected Republicans right now. And before it was
Thank
only
you.
40% in the Senate, but after 22, with all the strategic retirements from the McConnell Republicans, they are the majority in the Senate as well now, right? So if you've been talking to political scientists, hopefully who study polarization, surely they have mentioned that Trump is not the cause of polarization. Polarization begins before Trump, but Donald Trump is an accelerant. Okay. And he took that shit to a next level, right? And that is a level that most of the Republicans who want to be electable, because if you don't do it, it's not just that you have to be quiet about it anymore. Now you have to actually actively engage in their crazy, right? To be on the good list, or to avoid these primary things, which is why primaries are so bad, right? So it is important for people to know that it is, polarization won't evaporate because Donald Trump loses. He has taught many his witchcraft. And so therefore the answer really has to come from the people. The people are poorly prepared to meet this moment. If 50% of them don't even bother to vote, there's just no sugarcoating that. But we have what we have, and we have to start with what we have. And the book is designed not only to help us in this moment, but to get the long-term solutions that we need, because ultimately there's no pathway to American stability that doesn't involve hearts and minds in red states. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to do this, but I have heard many, many liberals say everything was fine, and then Trump came and he himself broke all of America. Sounds like you're saying that's not necessarily true. He's part of a long-term coming, and yeah, he made it really, really bad, but he didn't just,
Yes.
everything was perfect, and then poof, Trump appeared, and suddenly
No.
it went bad. Sounds like you don't believe that philosophy.
Well, I'll tell you why I don't believe it is I was working on a dissertation in 2012 on polarization, and he doesn't come down the escalator until 2015, right? So I know it's not true. I know I can tell you exactly why polarization. I mean, one of my academic articles really focuses on this. Here's the thing that I've come to after this 4 years of, like, I'm not an academic anymore. Really, I'm mostly an autistic kid's caretaker, right? And a strategist. I consult, right? So I have had a lot of time for intellectual odyssey, and what I've come to realize is actually this is the fight we had at the founding of the Republic. It seared up in 1860 into a bloody civil war. We fought it and it ended slavery, and that is a good thing. But then after that, we really fucked it up, because 50 years, 100 years later, you fast forward and there's military federal bases named after Southern traders. Okay. We took the wrong, like the Nazis, like 20 years after the Nazis, Germany is still like confused. Okay. But about the next generation is what starts pounding the Holocaust awareness and the rejection of far right ideologies very powerfully. It's a very big part of the civic culture in Germany. We took the other turn. We decided, well, it's easiest to get people back into the Union by welcoming them with open arms and ignoring a lot of stuff. And then that was bad enough. But then over the years and decades, we get to the point where the South starts to revise the history of the Civil War and turn themselves in to the victims. And that's the lost cause narrative that you may have heard mentioned, right?
Right.
So, what we're dealing with right now is the third, founding, Civil War, 1960s, end of civil rights, which of course is the antecedent to what we're dealing with, white identity and white nationalism now, right? This is all one story, in other words. And we've been looking at these events as discrete. And my next book, I hope to focus on how it's all one book.
Eric Lawson, Dawn of Unrest, ironically, my mom told me to read that 2 months ago. So
you should definitely read it. It is an incredible read.
You're smart. My mom's smart. That's two really intelligent women telling me that. So I'll probably listen.
There you go.
I just want to come back to, so the book is great. I view you as a patriot, and I would say to anybody, I know a lot of Republicans, even if you don't agree, this was written by somebody who actually cares about the country and where it's going, and it's obvious. So I would reread it for just that emotional imprint. In addition, while she's giving strategies for Democrats, these are good political strategies that if you were a Republican, I'd brush up on too. So I'm not trying to advocate anything. I'm just saying this is good information for everybody to read wherever you're coming from. And it's clear to me what brought you to do this. And maybe that's why you weren't as accepted on mainstream television because you're not wedded to any particular thing, but your version of what you see is the facts and you're a straight shooter. I want to come down to.
And for Republicans, I will tell people too, just really quick, the Republicans, if you think you have audience members that are Republicans, let me tell you guys, we have to have a healthy Republican Party. Cannot have a healthy country without it. So I'm deeply, deeply committed to helping you make that healthy party happen. But the first step is to vote for a Democrat just this one time. Down ballot too. Harris all the way down. Okay. And guess what? It's not herpes, okay? So it's not going to infect you for the rest of your life. You can do it once and then not ever do it again. But I'm going to tell you, you might like it.
Voting for a Dem is not herpes.
Tell them.
Calm. Yeah. Okay, back to being professional.
Condition, dude.
It's not. And I remember the time when it wasn't a bad thing to be a Democrat and vote for a Republican because you felt they were right on this one particular issue, or, and it wasn't okay to be a bad Republican and vote for a Democrat. And you may lean to something, but there wasn't this party wedded thing. Like I knew people were Republicans and Democrats, but they weren't as wedded to, I've got to vote for them. Because sometimes they go, I like the Democrat for my Republican reasons better than I like the Republican. He's a fake Republican. And I'd hear the same on the other side. I like this Republican because they're softer on these issues than this supposed Democrat who's going to be. So that's gone. That's part of the problem. I have other questions, but just one last time. I know I've been pounding on this and you've already answered it. Let's say we beat Trump this election. Okay. But then next election is a Trump-like figure. And then a Democrat, and then another Trump-like figure, and then a Democrat, and then another Trump-like figure. So we never get the complete pushback. And we can't get rid of the algorithms, and we can't stop the permanent campaign because we can't get enough dominance in the Senate to do a constitutional amendment. Is that a country that you would tell the average person, you should feel totally comfortable about? Everything will work out? Or now are we looking at a situation where it's a 50-50 chance the whole thing goes down? 50% chance maybe it doesn't, but 50% chance that another Trump-like figure, what sort of crazy January 6th type stuff is he going to think of? Like, I never even thought of the idea of just get a bunch of people and just walk up on the Capitol. I'm like, I never even thought of that. How do we know that other Trumpian-like figures aren't going to come up with other highly creative, original, massively destabilizing events? And even after we get them out of the Capitol and put some of the wrong ones in jail, and no, yes, for my conservative friends, I recognize not all of them did everything they were tried for, but a lot of them did, and a lot of them deserve jail time for that. How many more of these calamities can we have? Because even when the Capitol was brought under control, people were terrified, and the Republican Party and the Trump people were even more radicalized. And I'm just wondering, how many more levels of terror can we ramp up? How many more levels of anger and anguish can we ramp up before things go to a place where we can't come back from? One of the debates I had with professors was they would say, Mark, this is crazy for you to say there might be another civil war. And I go, well, I'm not saying that. I'm quoting other professors who are saying that. Okay, well, they're crazy. Well, there was this thing called Bloody Kansas. Civil War didn't just pop into existence.
Nope.
They had a 10-year, right? A lot of people forget this. I reminded many professors.
10-year run-up.
Yeah. I had to remind many professors there's a thing called Bloody Kansas. And it wasn't the scale of the Civil War, but it was people going out and shooting the other guy in the face because you're the different political party. Yep. This went on for a decade, and people were reading about it. So they got desensitized to killing fellow Americans. And I'm wondering, how many January 6th do we have before we get the effect of bloody Kansas today. And I was asking them, imagine one event where 100 Republicans go into the streets and fight 100 Democrats. And I mean, they stab each other to death, but it's all televised nationally. Does this country go, some people got upset, let's calm down? Or are they going to go, oh my God, they stabbed that Republican man to death, those evil Democrats, I need to go get my gun. And the Democrats say the same thing. Did you kill all those? Did you see all those Republicans just murdered all those Democrats live on television? Can we come back from something like that?
No, we can never get to that, right? So, like, one thing studying,
I hope not.
Nazis, I also studied. There's only one war that was mechanicalized in any capacity compared to what we have today, and that destructive technology, of course, ends up capped with the nuclear bomb, which is obviously as destructive as you can get. Yeah. Generally speaking, humanity. The reason why we have the entire international order, NATO, United Nations, the way Europe came together, how we tried to get rid of nationalism, all the shit that we've been doing for 80 years has been because we understand this basic truth. Humanity cannot survive another war that's mechanized at that level. It cannot. We cannot as people. This is not a civil war now, okay? Like, it's not a musket. People have AR-15s, right? So, like, my point is we must avoid that at all cost. And that is why I really need at least one billionaire friend who doesn't mind dropping 500 million, $1 billion into pro-democracy work, because the answer is we cannot afford to be there. That is why I really wish the media would do a better job holding Republicans accountable, like Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott, who are hyperbolic and pushing their constituents to want to kill other people through their hyperbole, right? Because we're playing with fire. And the answer is this: we cannot survive another situation like that. If Rick Scott or Ron DeSantis or Greg Abbott refuse to certify the election, the people are going to believe them. The people are going to believe you, Rick, Ron, Greg, and they're going to respond in violence. They're going to think that actually illegal stole the election. They've lost their whole country, and they must act violently. So, like, that is why this work has consumed my focus for 4 years, because we cannot afford to get there, and we must do everything we can to stop it. Now, will somebody come along? Here's my hope, is that Trump will lose this election and that somehow we'll do the trifecta. And maybe at that point, Republicans will be like, okay, we really need a different path, right? And they'll start retacking to people like Nikki Haley. But the fact of the matter is, the Republican Party as it is today is not in a position to have power today, wasn't in 2018, isn't now, and won't be in 2026. Okay, like we have a decade of electoral protectionism, basically, that we're going to have to do while we work on these other issues, especially the propaganda problem. I mean, the mass propaganda problem has people like me who used to teach constitutional law. I used to teach the civil liberties segment in my American politics class, and I would, with pride, I'd show them, this Jewish lawyer who defended the right of the KKK to march through this Jewish town in the Midwest.
Yeah, that was great.
Right? I mean, I was an absolutist, right? But what has the truth is? Yeah, the truth is our free speech is being weaponized by people intentionally, and we are really ill-equipped to deal with it. And, I hope that we can get through all of this piece with peace, and that we can get on better track. But I would be lying to tell people that I feel certain that things are going to be good. I mean, I wouldn't have put out a blog post 2 months ago that said, we're going to go through something. It will either be a fascist autocracy, which I would argue is the worst possible outcome. They win, and we end up with Project 2025 and an autocracy. But if we win, there still may be significant problems, especially because of Republican politicians who are willing to legitimate crazy stuff.
We're winding down. And I want to phrase this question the right way. I'm not trying to be offensive, but it is a fair question. So Republicans felt that the election was stolen, right, in 2020.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're being told. It's stolen. It's stolen. It's
yeah.
Yeah. What I was told by the professors is called existential threat language. So there's this gigantic threat that the world's going to end, existential threat. So, and that is very alarming language. It's another type of violence language. It's not exactly the same as violence. So you could say, hey, I don't like that person across the street. Why don't we go beat them up? And I'd like to kick them in the face. That's bad language in politics. But what's also bad is you say, there's a guy across the street. I'm not telling you what to do, but if he's there tomorrow morning, all your family's dead. Do what you will with that information. That both of those things.
That's our right wing. Yeah. That's literally what comes out of people's mouths almost, dude.
So let's say they are trying to steal the election. They are doing these things. If we use this strategy where we boil it down to let them know the danger, are we radicalizing the left? And do we get to a point where everybody in America is radicalized and we've just inadvertently created the Bleeding Kansas scenario?
No, because we're already there. We're on that track. That's where we're headed. The time to act softly, the low go high, they go low thing. That's because we did that. Now we're in crisis. Okay. And so to answer your question, is polarization a problem? Yes. Did I ever imagine that I would be encouraging elements of polarization on the left? No. Okay. And do I feel morally clean about that? I would not, if it wasn't for the fact that the other side, we've pushed this to the deadline, is now positioned in months to round up half of the Latino population and put them in mass deportation camps, to prosecute parents who helped their children transition before 18, to force women to bleed out and get sepsis in hospital parking lots with dead, rotting fetuses stuck inside of them. That's the reality of what we're facing, right? So I would argue is you can't rebuild your house when it's still on fire. Our house is on fire. It is on fire. We cannot rebuild it. Can't put the cart before the horse. And so when I started this work, I did a survey. I crowdsourced it, actually. It was the only thing I ever did like that after I had left my survey research lab, because I needed data and I didn't have a capacity to get it. So I did my own survey, and people coughed up. Some people wrote checks to do it. The reason I did it is because it was January, February. I ran the survey in March, basically, of 2021. And what I wanted to show people is this: in data, after an insurrection, after the coup, everything, okay? If you were to look at data in 2021 and ask voters in a survey, is there a threat to democracy? Republicans were 3 to 4 times more likely to say that there was. Democrats didn't even think there was an issue after an insurrection. Okay. So that's what this book is designed to fix.
They committed the insurrection, and then they said,
and it's
they're the most worried about a threat to democracy?
Yes, they're the ones that were worried about a threat to democracy. And why is that? Because they were told we stole the election, guys. They're yes, I understand. I am adding to polarization. Boo fucking who. People are going to die. Okay. We can't afford moral snugness and individual. Well, I went high when they went low, because the price for that, especially as a white lady with a PhD and the ability to get out, okay, the price to that isn't going to be paid by me. It's going to be paid by the people we purport to care the most about, these disadvantaged, marginalized communities who have no power, right? So if it takes people, I would even, if someone wants to call me a propagandist, fine. I will wear that badge with honor, because I know the work that I am doing has to be done.
We're past the point where we could say, those guys are extreme, we shouldn't engage in extremism. Now we're at the point where it's so dire, we have to engage in extremism to save what little we have left. Is that a fair summary?
And we did that strategy, by the way, based on altruism, views of a reality that doesn't exist about people and their ability to discern information and what they know and what would work and how it would work. We ignored reality, and it cost us a decade where maybe things could have been done more incrementally, right? And now we're in a crisis, and this book is a crisis solution. Yeah.
Well said. Well said. So sometimes when Republicans say liberals compare Trump to Hitler and say democracy will end, and that's polarizing, I think what you're saying is maybe, but it's also true.
Yes.
And we can't lie. So
yes,
I'm sorry that's polarizing, but it's also a fact.
Yes, it's a fact. I'm not asking anyone to lie. They're making up shit. You should do MAGA Twitter and let me tell you the things that I get accused of. People fervently believe that Democrats are all pedophiles who want to mutilate children's genitalia. I see that probably every day in my feed. Okay, guys. So yes, the answer has to be fire with fire.
I'm out of questions. Oh, I would point out Designated Survivor with Kiefer Sutherland was a television show. And I believe it was season 2. And there was a group of Republicans who wanted to take over. And they found this secret audio tape where the Republicans were talking about the great replacement theory and strategizing how they were going to do it. And that came out on TV, I believe, 2 years before you started seeing Republicans talking about the great replacement theory in real life. It was kind of weird that the television show was sort of predicting this and had a whole segment explaining it. I found that highly bizarre, and then it happens years later. I'll just leave that there. Is there anything I should have asked you, or that's key to understanding this book, or the impetus for why you did this, that we should get out for somebody watching this? Is there something that you're like, oh, there's a nugget that people need to understand so that you fully digest everything you've heard so far?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I would say, like, I'm a professor, so I know how hard it is to get people to do the reading, and buying the book is not enough. Okay. You have to read the book. And the reason I would say that you should is because Jamie Harrison, who blurbs this book as the DNC chair, Michael Steele, a guy who invented the parts of the strategy that I'm teaching Democrats to use now, the RNC chair, delivered 63 seats in the House for Republicans a year after the Great Recession was caused by George W. Bush and Republicans. So they know what they're doing. And they both found a lot of knowledge and value in this book. So if they're finding things that they need to know from their positions, then I am certain you are too. You will too. And so you have to read the book. Please read the book, and then take the end of the book. It's Michelle Obama. Do something. I'm here to tell you, most of the people you work with, most of the people you hang out with, unless you're one of these Beltway people, which their lives are so different. That's why they don't know that normal people don't like politics. So if you came up with a political family on the East Coast, you went to one of these schools and like everyone's always been engaged, right? Well, that's not normal America. So everyone's an influencer, and your job is to make sure that everyone that you can talk to in any capacity hears what the stakes of this election are about. Because when they think Republicans, they think low taxes, good on national defense. That's because that's all they know. They don't pay any attention to contemporaneous news. We both know, last 20 years especially, Republicans have neither been good at national defense nor good at the economy, okay? And yet that's the perception, the brand ownership that they have out there. We have to update people's priors on what it is to be a Republican and really define that definitionally as an extremist who wants to, take people's freedom.
I hope we do make that full disclosure, and give me a minute to explain before you judge. I was a Republican. I quit in 2012 because I saw Mitt Romney was pulling away and saying we're not going to bring Latin voters in. George W. Bush, for all of his faults, was almost 50-50 with Latin votes. Mitt Romney
yes, he was.
Family.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And then
oh, I know all that. Yep.
Yeah. So it was there. You guys had it. Okay. Yep. You had it.
Yep.
The Dems had a little bit higher percentage, but you were within a fighting stance. And then Mitt Romney comes and they go, oh, well, he's decent. And I go, well, he has family ties to Mexico. He has connections in Mexico, and he knows how to speak Spanish. Won't speak Spanish, won't bring up family ties to Mexico, ruined the participation of Latin people in the Republican vote. And me and my mom, as Mexican, we're watching this. We're going, it looks like they tried on bringing Mexicans in and decided, no, that's not for us. And I saw that 4 years before Trump. 4 years. So when I saw Trump and they're like, oh, Trump's uniquely racist. And I see Romney going, I'm the decent representative of the Republican Party. Trump represents this downward slide. And I'm like, bro, you hated on Mexicans and made sure they didn't vote for you. And you did everything to ostracize them when you could have. And you lost the election for it. How are you integrationist? How are you not a racist? You literally denied your connection to Latin America and you acted like you didn't know how to speak Spanish. I'm from the Central Valley. We know what it looks like. I'm sorry when white people do that. They don't want people to think they're cool with brown people because they're scared.
Yeah.
So that's what I saw. So I'm like, really? Trump's the racist one? What the hell were you doing, Mitt? That was 4 years before. And it was strong enough where I saw where things were going. And never in my wildest dreams did I think it would go Trump. But boy, was I right. So people are like, oh, you were Republican? Yeah. And I saw that they were racist 4 years before Trump and where it was going. And I got the hell out. Never went back.
Yeah.
Told them,
yep,
you know, you lost me. I'd be on your team if you didn't do all the racist, xenophobic, sexist stuff and you just kept it to policy, but you can't do it. You just can't do it. You got to hate.
Nope.
You got to do xenophobia.
Yep.
You got to basically showcase, like I was just showing you, RNC convention, your dog whistling racism. And you're supposed to be open to minorities. And that just seems dumb because you guys are like planning on losing when you don't have to. Sorry.
Well, it's dumb if you do it before you have the power to end elections. Okay. And so, like, it's really a fool me once, fool me twice situation here. It's on us now, dude. They've told us who they are. Just interesting context for that. McCain's going to run for president, okay, in 2008. So 4 years prior to your epiphany.
Yeah.
McCain wants to run for president. In 2006, with this Bush split and the atmosphere, comprehensive immigration reform becomes the big thing. And McCain is the leader of it. He's the Republican leader of it. By the time you get to the Republican primary, he has to disavow. He had to vote against his own immigration reform bill, by the way. So he cast a vote against the bill, that just like Langford just did with his immigration bill. And then in the primary, had to run away from comprehensive immigration reform, okay? Then Mitt Romney comes 4 years later and, they're like, listen, we think you can do all this racist shit that Trump ends up using this playbook, okay? And Romney, to defend Romney, says, I'm not willing to do that. But his advisors still convinced him of the things that you've observed, not to mention that he's Mexican. Don't speak in Spanish. Don't talk about immigration, right? He does all of those things, right? And, they come out with an autopsy. It's called, you should Google this. It'll blow your mind. Yeah. It's called the Republican Autopsy in 2013. And the autopsy is like, you guys can't do this and win elections in this country because this country has a rising Latino population. So you have to not do this. Okay. That's the 2013 opinion of the establishment of the Republican Party. So we get another conversation about comprehensive immigration reform. They pass 60 votes in the motherfucking Senate. Okay. A comprehensive immigration bill. But because John Boehner is under so much pressure by these ideologues, this Tea Party movement, which was new back then, to not put it up for a vote, it dies. He never puts it up to a vote because the House Republicans control the chamber and they decide whether it's going up to a vote, okay? And so that dies. And in that process, one of their leaders, Eric Cantor, who was a congressman from Virginia, who was one of the leaders of the effort in the House to pass comprehensive immigration reform, gets primaried out by this nut called David Brat, Tea Party nut.
That's right.
And from that moment on, that's when the Republicans decided, actually, we're going to go anti-majoritarian. So yes, we can't win if we isolate people of color, but given that nobody pays attention to news and politics, we can get away with a shit ton of that and still have these people vote for us, A, and B, like what we're going to do then is start to decay and take away from their ability to vote. So you get all these redistricting gerrymanders, you get all of the voter suppression laws that you saw in the 2010s coming through, and this is all built and accumulated. And so the answer to that question is it was a decision that the establishment may never have wanted to take, but because the digital environment that was emerging, blogs and the internet and YouTube, and then cable news, which by that point had 10 years of Fox News and Rush Limbaugh. They built the Frankenstein, and that Frankenstein not only burned down the Republican Party, because the party that you belong to is dead. Okay. It died circa 2013. It is dead. Okay. Not only has it burned down the Republican Party and left something else in its place, which is what we have now, MAGA Republicans, it is now threatening to burn down everything and everyone. So it's a huge issue. I'm glad you're highlighting it. I'm glad you had me on, and I hope people will read the book and do something.
That's why I kept asking about if Trumpism dies, because hate crimes against Latin people were up like 300% in 2014 and 2015. Trump didn't start that. That was already there. Romney had already decided to pull away from Latinos and African-American voters. For George W. Bush, I'm not endorsing him, but for all of his faults, he was reaching out to African-American pastors. He knew he couldn't get mainstream African-Americans, but he thought he could get the religious room. And it was working. He was getting a solid group of Black pastors and Latin people. And I'm like, this is a Republican Party I could see. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying they didn't do clawed-headed things, but you could start to see where they're going. We recognize not everybody's white, and we're going to have to somehow form a coalition. And then it looked like after Bush, they said, no, we're not doing that. We're scrapping that, and we're going a different direction. And I was like, you guys didn't see this? It didn't start with Trump. They were doing this half a decade before him. And he just realized where they were going. And I'm like, if that's the case, how is it reasonable to think that they're going to pull away from racism when they've been engaging in the idea years before Trump, and then have rapidly embraced them in 2016 and then again in 2020? Even if the guy disappears or goes to jail or he's brought to another planet, can you de-racist? That's not a word, but can you de-racist a political party that's been growing this way for what will be 2 decades by the time these elections? I mean, we're approaching a 2-decade period here, or a 15-year period. I'm wondering, can you deprogram these people?
We have to try. That's all I can say is we have to try, right? We cannot not try. I mean, that always this mission was so insane, right? Like, I understood that. I'm a pragmatist, dude. I mean, I'm a pragmatist through and through. So I knew, okay, Rachel's going to go fix the strategy for the entire Democratic Party, and we're going to fix everything in time for 2024, right? I knew that was an insane mission, and that I would fail. I knew I would fail. I mean, I assumed I would fail, guys, even though I was very optimistic. When you're trying to do something that's impossible to do, you have to be somewhat pragmatic about the possibility that you probably won't be able to do it, right? But so that's where now you have that problem, listener. Now I have told you our problem is our civic culture, and the only way to fix any of this shit is to fix that first. There's no workaround. So now you got to do something.
You don't have to answer this question. I'll ask you an email. I'll send you a copy of the video after we're done here. If you know anybody else who might be interested in doing an honest interview on political polarization, I'll ask you in an email. You don't have to name anybody, but we always try to keep the conversation going. I hope you found it was a fair audience, and we're just trying to get the information out. Last thought, this is the game I play. You're not you. You're not me. You're a third-party person. They watched this interview. Man, there was a lot. And they're saying, wow, I got a bunch of stuff, so many different things. It's hard for me to remember them all. But there was this one thing that the doctor said. And while there was a lot of material, I cannot stop thinking about that one thought 5 days after I watched this interview. What is that one super sticky thought you want everybody to be left with, doctor?
No one knows what I know. No one knows what you know. You got to tell people what you know if you want people to know what you know. So like we have to make more pits and more stomachs in other words. Okay. If you're a third party person watching this, then you know what you're highly interested. You may not be a partisan, but you have the interest bug that is the commonality for all of us, left, right, center, MAGA, all of us have an interest that doesn't exist in others. And so what our survival hinges short and long term on how many people we can make uncomfortable about the status of their government. Because I when I started researching polarization in 2012, I would have never told you in a million years that we would be in this position, that we'd have an insurrection.
Thank you.
Trump would get elected. Like I would have never predicted any of this, right? So like it shows like the potential for shit to get much worse than we can envision in my own optimism biases of the past, right? So we got to meet the moment. We have it in us. And if you're a third party voter, I'm here to tell you, both parties are not the same. They were the same in 1990, but they are not the same now. And you need to vote for the one that stands up for your right to vote and for democracy writ large. And that is not today's Republican Party.
Of the 200 professors, or we're approaching about 230 professors that I've interviewed, all of them said what you said. I never imagined something like January 6th happening. They were all caught off guard by that.
And I'm a Cassandra. I mean, here's the truth, though. I mean, I want to just clarify one fucking point, and this is really important. Yeah. I knew it was going to happen summer of 2020 and started doing media and talking about Trump's flying around the country. He's laying this infrastructure to prevent the vote counting in the blue wall states. And it worked. To this day, on my comments, I'll have people say, don't tell me I didn't see what I saw with my own eyes. I went to bed and Trump was winning in Pennsylvania. And the next thing I know, he's got Joe Biden has 500,000 votes. How did that happen? Well, it happened because they wouldn't let the mail-in ballots be counted at all. They were going to break disproportionately for Dems. And so they refused to let them count so that the initial night accounts would not account for any mail-in, just day of votes, which they knew Trump would lead. It was an intentional strategy. They did it in plain sight. That's why I was so frustrated with the media treating the big lie like something that had to be disproven instead of abjectly rejected face value. And I started talking about there would not be a peaceful transfer of power months before the election. And I got to tell you, people sneered at me. People who kind of get it thought I was nuts. And, it was very obvious that they were not going to leave office willingly.
Do you have any dark
predictions? Did I know it was going to be a storm of the Capitol? No. I mean, I'm not going to say that.
Yeah, but something.
Yeah, 2 days before, once we knew that he is calling the troops to Jan 6, I had a pod. I had Jonathan Metzl on my pod, which is a great, professor. You should get him on your show to talk about his research. But anyway, him and I were on my pod. Metzl, Metzl, Jonathan Metzl, the book Dying of Whiteness, great book. You should all read it. Anyway, him and I were both talking about what's coming to DC. It's going to be bad. This is going to be really bad in 2 days. And that's why I was just so astounded that there was no security preparation around the Capitol. I mean, if it would have seemed a no-brainer to me in the environment that we were in with Steve Bannon telling everybody it's going to be huge. It's just frustrating that the information's right there. It's kind of like with the Iraq war stuff. I mean, there was a lot of information that discounted or refuted the administration's claims about Saddam Hussein's ties to both weapons of mass destruction and to the Taliban, right? And it could have been prevented if we had better information media system, And so it's important for people to understand, I never thought it could get this bad in 2012. Once Trump came down that golden escalator, I had a pit in my stomach. It has never left me. And it's been almost 10 years. So, I'd like us to meet this moment and get by it. And, but I don't want people to think it's going to be easy, because it will not be.
You had a bad feeling about a year before January 6th. Let's say Trump wins. How bad is your feeling compared to that time?
Oh, it's terrible. Guys, there's no option in which Trump wins in which we maintain a democracy. Now, people will never believe me about that, but it's a fact, and so much of a fact that what I learned is if you're getting out, get out quick, or you're not getting out with any of your assets. if Donald Trump was to win, I'm in the Northwest now. I'm not in Virginia anymore. Moved home to Oregon. I'm not saying for this reason.
Oh,
I'm an
West
autistic
Coaster.
child, and I needed him to be in Oregon
West
where they have
Coast.
great public infrastructure.
Mhm.
Yeah, West Coast, right? But at the end of the day, like it's this Trump winning this time is not a survivable event for our democracy. Period. So it's not like you're going to wake up the next day and not be free. Okay. But it went very quick. And I did a project. I did a project this year that I called Project 1933, in which I showed people, Hitler gets sworn in January 30th as a weak chancellor. He is given just 2 Nazis in the cabinet because they're going to control him. The conservatives are going to use him
That's right.
to get the shit that they want to do done. Okay. Within a month, civil liberties are starting to get suspended. Within 2 months, the Reichstag's fire at the end of March, and you have democracy's dead in 2 months, guys. They had started opening Dachau, the first concentration camp for political prisoners, which was predominantly political prisoners then.
That's right.
Members of the opposition party, to be clear. Okay. That they opened that shit up in March 15th. She's sworn in January 30th into a democratic republic with limited power, and by March 15th, he's sending motherfuckers over to Dachau. So this is not a time to screw around. Again, it's not going to give you a venereal disease. Just vote one time for Democrats, people who want to have a constitutional order where there's rule of law and a president that is subject to the law, because that's a change that we are going to have to confront. We need a president that is not immune from the law. Thank you, Supreme Court. And if we're going to have an immunity clause, we got to be very, very careful about who we put in there. Donald Trump is making no bones about it. There's plenty of information online. Don't have to take my word for it. Go watch Steve Bannon's show. They have a plan. They're coming for all of us. Our only hope of stopping him is winning in 2024, up and down the ballot, but particularly up. Just vote for a damn Democrat.
And for everybody watching who thinks that the language the doctor's using right now is hyperbole, she predicted the midterms correctly when the experts did it, and she predicted January 6th, not exactly the event, but something's coming. And both times people kind of thought, oh, well, you're crazy. And she was 100% right. So be careful of those outliers who make predictions and you go, well, that's insane. See if they have a track record of being right when everybody said they were wrong. I found myself in that position with the Iraq War. I was telling everybody, there's no weapons of mass destruction. These people are not Al-Qaeda. They're mostly Iraqis defending their homes. And I was called Marcus the Liberal. I would be introduced by my own family at family events as Marcus the Liberal. They wouldn't even hear my name, or it's just like, oh, that's Mark the Liberal, in front of a group of 3 before I even walked in the door. And it got so bad because we didn't have social media. I carried an inch thick of different printouts of news articles so that when people would say that's a lie, I had to go, hold on. Okay, haha, AP News Plus says it's not. And the look on people's faces was just, where did you get that? Who said what? I never, yeah, it was in the AP News, Associated Press. You just said I made it up on my head. My favorite one was when I said only 2% of the Iraqis fighting are actually Al-Qaeda insurgents. The rest are Iraqis who are defending the property. They're like, that's garbage. And I go, how come the United States Department of the Pentagon issued that as their understanding of the Iraq War? The look on people's faces, just shocked to hell. Never heard this, never saw it, never heard any of this. And then because they hadn't heard it, I must be lying or I made a deep fake. That's what I was told. That's a deep fake. You made that article up so that you would seem this. And I was 100% right. Nobody wanted to hear that because they didn't want to hear that they were part of a government that would lie to the American people, lie to the international stage, and get 10,000 Americans killed and about 35,000 wounded, destroy a reputation around the world, destabilize the Middle East. It's just, we couldn't do that. We just wouldn't do that. No, we did. Yeah. We did. We absolutely did it.
And we didn't have to, because you and I both can tell you. And I've had people like straight up, like I'm like, no, dude, no. There was no confusion. Like we all know that there was no ties. There was no weapons because that one ambassador came out with it, right? Like we all knew, and we could have known, and just like we can and should know now. But one thing that's different, right? I mean, not so different, because they're like, oh, you made it up, it's all fake news. The thing that Donald Trump has done that has put us in such a uniquely dangerous situation doesn't compare to Bush, doesn't compare to Rom, doesn't compare to anything, okay, except for Nazi Germany and Hitler, is that he has discounted all sources of truth. So there's no source of truth other than Trump or MAGA or an affiliate of MAGA. And it doesn't matter what data you're using nowadays, guys, CDC, World Health, NATO, NOAA, it doesn't matter, because in the Republican mind, all information from all sources that are not conservative approved sources are fake. That's very dangerous.
And they will turn on each other. I was there when Fox started to go, maybe we can't keep talking about Stop the Steal. And I saw people just immediately bolt from that channel and goes to Newsmax, which was even more hardcore. So they were like,
yep,
we'll get what we want. We'll end it there. Thank you, doctor. Thank you for your time. I'll email you a copy soon. I'll ask for any recommendations if you have them. Thank you for time. Thank you for caring. And for everybody, look, there's a Republican and a Democrat, and they both said it's worth reading.
Yep.
So this was made by a patriot.
And you'll understand exactly what happened to your party by reading this book, by the way. Even if you don't want to know the other shit, you will understand how you lost control of your party to a bunch of bigot nativist religious fanatics when you read this book. And you will see it was not an accident.
Written by a patriot. You don't have to agree with everything she says, but you can certainly see that there is a passion for America, an understanding of where America is going and how to fix it. I would recommend it for everybody. Again, you don't have to agree, but there's a lot of good information, and it's a particular deep insight into the problems of America at this particular moment. And for that, I consider it like a historical point in time, this book, especially for my research. You had some great data points I'm going to put in my updated notes. Thank you, doctor.
Cool.
I will email you shortly, and I want to say thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for letting me go on a deep nerd dive. I miss my professoring days, so it was fun. Yeah,
I'm a giant wonk right here with you. So thank you.
Right.
We'll end it there, and thanks for coming out. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, how do I exit? Let's see. All right, I'm just exiting.